Maxwell Hagege. Logan is a leading contemporary Western artist based in Ojai, California. He also spends significant time in the Vermilion Coast area of Arizona, where he draws much of his inspiration. Logan's works are celebrated for their strong use of geometric shapes, bold imagery, and iconic Western landscapes. In recent years, Logan has sold out shows across the country, from Los Angeles to Santa Fe, Taos, and New York City. He's done collaborations with legendary brands such as Stetson, Allen Edmonds, and Pendleton. Together with his brother Bo Alexander, who's also here with us today, they founded Maxwell Alexander Gallery in Los Angeles in 2012, which has modernized the image of Western galleries and continues to be one of the very top Western galleries in the America West today. We appreciate Logan's contributions to the Cure Show. In 2013, he was recognized with the Artist Choice Award, which was one of his first major recognitions. He's also received significant recognition from the Idlejoy Museum in Indianapolis, the Autry Museum in Los Angeles, and he's collected by museums and top collectors nationwide. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our featured artist, my friend Logan.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, sir. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. I thought I'd start with this quote, which really struck a chord with me, from Sylvia Plath. It's a hell of a responsibility to be yourself. It's much easier to be somebody else or nobody at all. You know, as we start out as artists, we're trying to figure out who we are. We're inspired by everything around us, and those early years that sets the groundwork and the base for who we become as artists. And I don't personally believe that any of us are really born with like a natural talent. If you talk to any of these artists in the show, there's a lot of effort, a lot of hard work that goes into doing what we do. And I really think it starts with curiosity and just having an interest. And so for me, that's where things started. And as a kid, I was really interested in cartoons, comic books, and that's kind of where I always thought I would end up. I figured I would be an animator. And you'll see here as I talk, I sort of stepped in that direction for a bit and realized it wasn't necessarily for me. But these images shaped my childhood and into my teenage years. So here are some drawings from when I was 9 years old. And you see with the dog drawings here on the left, I was tracing these drawings out of a How to Draw Animation sort of book from Walter Foster. And that's really how I taught myself how to draw. I didn't know how to draw, so I figured I'd start tracing images. And after a while, I figured I needed to do it on my own, so I started drawing some of these other things, just copying them and trying to improve my drawing skills. That's probably my first cowboy drawing from 1989. And then, inspiration comes from everywhere. So my older brother drew this when I was 9. And I still have this sketchbook. I wanted to put this image in the talk, and I dug it out of my bookshelf and found this. So you could see here's the drawing he did, and then after I did my drawing. And so I'm picking up influences from the very start, from anywhere I could, like a sponge. Here's some more drawings. I wasn't tracing here, but did Mr. Clean, Dennis the Menace, and Roger Rabbit. And just a side note, my kids are already better than me. Here's my daughter and my son. So I continued on and was just drawing every day. And here I am at age 12, improving a little bit, but again, my inspiration, The Simpsons and a character from a comic book. And then a little bit later, so a lot happens between, there's kind of nowhere to put this, between these years as a kid drawing, and then, I got really into music as a teenager, into surfing, And but drawing and art was always in the background, and I hated school every day of it. And after graduating high school, I figured I had to do something, and I was not interested in going to college. I actually did one semester of community college and kind of had like a realization that school just was not for me. So I always loved animation, so I contacted this company called Spumco. They made Ren and Stimpy, that's kind of their best known cartoon, and just asked if they were needing any interns. And so I got an internship at this animation studio. It was pretty short-lived. I think I was there for about 6 months. I realized that for me, making art, I didn't like the collaborative aspect of animation. And so that, it just was not fun for me. It wasn't a great fit. But the lucky thing that happened here is one of the producers at this studio had a meeting with me, and he said, you know, if you really want to do this, you should sharpen your skills. And he recommended a school called Associates in Art. And so I went to this school and started taking animation classes, and I was exposed to life drawing at that school as well, which is a big part of your training as an animator. So I was taking 80% animation classes and maybe 20% life drawing, and then that started to shift over time. I realized that I was really enjoying that, like learning how to draw and paint something, or sorry, at that point, just draw, learning how to draw something realistically. And so we were doing these really long poses. The models would pose for anywhere from 9 to 12 hours. And so we would do these figure studies. And after a while, I just fully dropped any of the animation classes and decided that I didn't want to work at this studio anymore. And so I just shifted my full attention to learning how to draw. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I wanted to learn how to do this. So at this school, I was exposed to life drawing. So that was a long pose, the previous image. Here's quick sketches on the right-hand side. And then I started to learn about composition. So these are thumbnail sketches here behind me. And this was a really, really important aspect of art for me, to be exposed to this early on. For me now, composition is everything. That's the basis of everything that I do. So to start thinking of the picture frame and how you're going to place a figure or some element on a page was something that was very new to me. And I was drawing. Like, this is an old sketchbook from my student years. And I would fill one of these books every month. So 30 days, I would just go through. I was taking notes, drawing everything. I'd bring a sketchbook with me everywhere. And I was drawing everything. A cafe, I'd draw some people. I'd draw stuff out of my head. I'd draw caricatures, figure studies, that sort of thing. And then to this day, in my back pocket, there's always a sketchbook. And I'm constantly drawing up ideas. And this is where most of my images start for my paintings, the ideas. And so this was super valuable. For me, it was mileage, putting in the effort and getting all the bad drawings out of the way. That was always my thought. Just keep going, and over time, improving. Let's see. So while I was studying at this school, Associates in Art, I was seeing that I was missing some teaching. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about color. So while I was at this school, I started seeking out teachers that could help me with things that I was lacking at the school that I was at. So Joseph Mendez was a teacher. I reached out to him, and he was teaching out of his studio, luckily. So I'd go there once or twice a month, and I'd go there all day and draw and paint with other people. And he would always ask, he would do a critique in the middle of class. He'd take you into his office, and so he'd say, bring your paintings in, and we'll see what you did. And so I'd always come to class, with a stack of paintings like that, because I was painting so much. I was trying to get that mileage in. And most people in the class were sort of hobbyists, so they'd come in with one or two paintings for their critique. And he was like always kind of impressed that I was working. He took me seriously because I was serious about it. I was working really hard. So it was great. I feel like I got a lot of really good attention from him. And he was really tough, which I loved. I remember one painting I brought in, and he was critiquing it, and he's looking at it kind of quietly and not saying anything. And he goes, I'm not going to do an impression of him, but he had a really heavy Cuban accent. He was Spanish, but lived in Cuba. And he asked me, how do you get home from here? What's your route home? So I said, well, I jump on the 405, and then this is in Los Angeles. I jump on the 405, and then I take that north and go to the 101 west. And he goes, okay, hold on, stop there. He goes, okay, when you get to the 101 and the 405, roll down your window, take this painting and throw it out the window. And I was like really happy with the painting. I thought I did a decent job, but that honesty was so valuable because I didn't need somebody to kiss my butt. I needed somebody to give it to me, real. Like I wanted the reality of where I was as a student. And at this point, I didn't know who I was as an artist. I'm a sponge. I'm just trying to learn and take in as much information as I can. Steve Houston, same sort of a deal. He was teaching out of his studio. I contacted him, and it was a couple nights a week. He would have classes, and it was like $10 to go sit in on his classes. It was amazing what he offered. And with Steve, he was, I would say he was the first person that exposed me to thinking about art as something beyond just drawing or painting something that you see and trying to make a pretty picture. He was thinking more about what's your perspective on the world? How do you see the world as an artist? Who are you? What do you want to say with it? And so he'd give these great lectures in between our drawing sessions in there. The model would take a break, and then he'd go up and do these great talks on art and sometimes on anatomy or drawing, but it was just really super valuable for me. I was also exposed to Dan McCaw around this time, who I didn't really study with, but he was kind of more of a mentor. I called him up out of the blue, and he was really generous and said, come visit the studio. And same thing, he would look at my paintings, give me advice, and I really learned a lot from him. He had a really interesting way of seeing the world, and he's had a pretty big evolution from when he started to where he's at now. And I mean, it's through the generosity of many artists. I'm only mentioning a few here, but many artists have been super generous with their time and given me tons of advice to this day. I mean, I'll call friends up and ask for advice, and it's really a generous community. So at this art school, Associates in Art, these were my heroes early on. John Singer Sargent, Anders Zorn, and Joaquin Sorolla. So these artists were virtuosos, and still to this day, I don't even know how they did what they did. It's amazing stuff. So that from the beginning, my bar was set so high, and I always felt like I was behind. I was, I guess, 19 at the time when I was studying here. And I just felt like I was behind because these guys, I think Sargent painted this painting on the top here when he was 24 or something like that. I may be off, but he was young. And it's a huge, amazing painting at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. So yeah, I just, at this time, I was obsessed with learning how to draw and paint realistically. It was just an obsession. I wanted to get technically really good. And this is what I wanted to get to, and getting here felt impossible. It still feels impossible. I remember at the school there was a portfolio day where these illustrators came from back then they would have sketch artists from studios. They would help design movie posters and stuff. And so I showed one of the guys, one of the artists that came to review portfolios, I showed him my work, and I was like, do you think it's too late for me? Like, do you think I can do this? And he was laughing, like, what are you talking about? You're so young, but I was just like, yeah, right. I still had these artists as the example, so I really felt like I was behind. I was also exposed to great illustrators. I really think these are great artists. J.C. Leyendecker, Dean Cornwell, all these people are big influences on me, more so today than Sargent or Sorolla or these other guys. N.C. Wyeth, huge in my life to this day. This school was great for me because I was exposed to all that stuff. That's half the battle. Just being exposed to great artwork for me was setting me in the right direction, I felt. So this is me fresh out of art school. I started showing in galleries right out of art school. There was a student actually at the school named Christina Cooper who was already showing in galleries, and she saw that I was serious about it, so she took me aside and was kind of explaining to me, this is how you get into a gallery. Like you go through a magazine, like Southwest Art Magazine or something, and look at the ads, and if you think your work might make sense with that gallery, send them a portfolio. In those days, you'd send 35mm slides with a resume that basically had nothing on it because I hadn't really done anything yet, but I was turned down by a million galleries, and then eventually a small gallery in Pasadena took on my work. And so this is what I was showing. I didn't, again, this is early, I'm 22 at the time, and I had no idea who I was as an artist. I was influenced by Sorolla, by Dan McCaw, and so I'm just trying to figure things out. So influenced by these paintings. On the top row, that's Dan McCaw, and bottom here is Sorolla. So this is what I was thinking about at the time. I grew up in California, grew up surfing, beaches. It made sense, you know. And there's a lot to do with this subject. Like to this day, I still paint a lot of white blankets. White colored cloth is really fun to play with. There's so much variety in white. People just think of something as like red is colorful and exciting, but white, there's a lot of really interesting color. As you can see, the Dan McCaw here in the middle, it's shifting more pink, warmer, back and forth, all these different images. And then this was earth-shattering for me to discover Gustav Klimt. His use of three-dimensional elements against the flat two-dimensional was really something that struck a chord with me. And still to this day, he remains one of my biggest influences and artists that I really love to see. It was around this time, you know, after doing those sort of impressionistic women on the beach, I just was not happy with my work. And I felt like I was like thinking, how would this artist paint that? So I was trying to paint like Sorolla, doing a poor job of that. Trying to paint like Dan McCaw, again, not doing a great job of it, but I was thinking of them as I was working. And that just felt, it just didn't feel right to me. And so I took, I think, 3 months off from painting, and I was just like beating myself up. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm just copying other people, I'm not myself. And Klimt was part of that, because I realized like this isn't necessarily photographic or ultra realism. This is realism filtered through an artist's, whatever you want to call it, through their soul, through their mind. It's distilled. It's not exact copying of reality. And that I realized that at that moment it wasn't about how great I could be technically. It was about how do I get my vision and my voice to come out, because I want to say have something to say that's unique. And so these images started to come out around, after taking that break for about 3 months. I started doing these little oil paintings in a sketchbook because it felt like I wasn't going to waste a bunch of big canvas. And I did these little paintings out of my head. And it was, something about it felt great. It felt way more connected to who I was. I was rebelling from art school. These are very, very simple images. I was doing all these out of my head. But this was a time of great growth for me, because I felt like this is where I was really learning how to paint. I was giving myself, I guess, assignments is what I would say. I would give myself a really ugly palette of colors. Like I would use burnt umber, yellow ochre, black and white. And I would say, how can I make a beautiful harmony with these ugly colors, these muddy colors? And so I really learned a lot about color. And this is kind of where I started thinking of my work in a series. So how many times can I paint a subject and still find it interesting to me? And how many times, how differently can I paint the same thing? So I was thinking a woman on the beach, or this one's sitting next to the trees there, or whatever. There's supposed to be trees, but with a low horizon line and a big sky. How many different ways can I paint that and still be interested in it? Not thinking about if other people are going to be interested in it, but is it doing something for me, for my artistic soul? Around that time also, Thomas Wolmer I was strongly influenced by his work, very ethereal, soft edges. And I mean, my edges were not so soft, but I just loved his harmonies, still do. So I wanted to mention here, it's talking about style versus a voice. A lot of time people say, how did you find your style? And I don't think in those terms at all. Like style style feels very concrete to me. Like it's a, like a mid-century style of architecture, or it's Art Nouveau, or to me it feels very, very concrete. So what I was always searching for and still evolving towards finding and changing is my voice. So it's not a style, it's a voice. And how I got here, and I think how most people do, is just by experimentation. So this was a time of experimentation for me. In 2003, I went on a trip to Canyon de Chelly in Arizona with a group of artists from the California Art Club. My friend Glenn Dean took this photo of me. That's me with the big hat, taking a picture of him. This was a life-changing trip for me. This was my real first exposure to the American Southwest. And something about it clicked. The simplicity of the canyon walls, the sky, and the ground plane. My brain was able to break that down in a way that related to how I was thinking and how I was experimenting with my work. So it was a big shift for me at this time. Here's one of the paintings that resulted from that trip. So 2003, we had an exhibit at a gallery. I think there were like 20 artists on the show or something, in the show and on that trip. It was really a lot of fun. Sorry, let's see here. Again, here's a year later. This just like the simplicity. This you could take the tree out and put one of these female figures with a low horizon line. It's basically the same concept. How do I break down the picture plane in a simple way that's interesting to me? Around this time, I was 24. I submitted my work to a couple galleries. I shot very high. I'm not going to mention the galleries, and you'll see why in the story. But so one in Scottsdale, Arizona, and one in Santa Fe, and they both had a good response to my work, and they said, yeah, we'd like to meet with you. So I said, you know what, I'm actually going to be in Scottsdale next week to the Scottsdale Gallery and then to the Santa Fe Gallery. Same thing, you said, I'm going to be in Santa Fe, oddly enough, so let's meet up. And so I drove to Scottsdale, had my paintings, and I walk into the gallery, and I meet the gallery director, and she goes, you're Logan? And I was like, oh yeah, and she goes, oh, you're too young, And it was kind of heartbreaking, but she thought I was like how old I am now, in my 40s or older. I forget what she said, but she thought I was quite a bit older. And she was basically explaining that I don't really know who I am. I don't know who I am as an artist yet. And she was gonna watch me, and she said, just keep in touch. And so heartbroken, I drove up to Santa Fe, and it was a rainy day, and I'm walking with my paintings, and I go into the gallery. I walk up the stairs to this gallery, and I'm just, it was a trek where I parked really far, and I walk in, I look like a wet dog, and the gallery director goes, you brought your paintings in? Like that, and I was like, well, I thought we were having a meeting, I don't know. And he goes, all right, bring them in. And he said, you are way too young to be shown in my gallery, and had the same exact experience back to back. And, but again, back to my teacher, Joseph Mendez, I really liked the honesty. At the time, it felt horrible, but I had a thick skin. As an artist, you have to have a thick skin, and I felt like I was on a path that I wanted to be on, so I just shifted and kept going. And a side note, funny part of this is both galleries in following years did ask me to come back and show with them, so it kind of ended up working out. This is one of the paintings that I brought to these galleries. I still have this in my studio, actually. This is a painting. I went on a little bit later after that Canyon to Shade trip. I went on a really epic road trip with my friend Glenn Dean, who I met in my early 20s, and we just did a whole tour of the Southwest. We were on the road for 2 weeks, and we had a quota. We had to do 4 paintings a day, and so we were just hitting up every national park and places like this that are just off the beaten path. And we called this Teaching Rock because we sort of felt like this peak was teaching this peak how to be a peak. So I don't really know what it's called, but that's what we called it. But this painting, again, this is hanging in I don't love having my paintings in my house, but we have some in my house. This is hanging in my living room. And I sort of do like hanging on to pieces to see my progression and my personal history as an artist. And these painting trips to this day are so valuable to me. Again, the generosity of great artist friends, people that are willing to let me go out and paint with them. And I learn a lot from these friends. Here's Josh Elliott on the lower right-hand side. Here's Glenn Dean here. There's Glenn Dean down there. This is Vermilion Cliffs, Vermilion Cliffs area. That's Lee's Ferry that Ross mentioned. This is me painting with a little girl down in, I don't know if you can see the image, but down in Monument Valley. She was our Navajo guide out there, brought his daughter along, and she was helping us do some paintings, the group that we were with. But yeah, just this experience on the road. It's number one, it's really fun to be hanging out with these friends of mine. We have a lot of fun, but it's serious work at the same time. We're gathering reference, not necessarily to make finished paintings from. For me personally, I go out and paint the same way I go to the gym to exercise to be healthy. When I go out and paint in the field, it's to stay healthy as an artist. I learn from it. I keep these experiences in my head. Whenever I look at a sketch, I can feel how warm it was that day, what the sage smelled like, if there was wind or not, if there were a bunch of bugs. And these are the things we experience in the field. Bugs and wind and cold, and this happens when it's windy. Your easel gets knocked over and your painting gets ruined, but that's part of the deal. Some more field sketches here. These are these are paintings I do on the spot. They're about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour long. And I don't really show these. I have all these paintings still. They're just kind of for my own good. This was a painting I was really struggling with, I remember, and it's like I can remember the day. It really brings me back. That's why I love having them around. I was really struggling, and then I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to go crazy. So I started scooping up, like my friend Len does. I was just scooping up all this thick paint, and was just like, I'm just going to ruin this painting. And I went wild, and then I ended up actually liking what happened. So I sort of saved the painting by letting go of the preciousness of it, which is a lesson that I learned that I use in the studio, to not be too precious. This is an area north of Santa Barbara where I proposed to my wife, actually. Just a simple outdoor sketch out on the Navajo land. This is some trees near where I live. These are all fairly old sketches here. This is up near where Glenn Dean lives, where I was painting out with him one day. Again, just stuff I don't really show, the use is just for my own knowledge and for my own good. I don't turn these into paintings in the studio. I might refer to them in some way, but generally not. But this is an example of what I do in the studio. I take all of that information that I gather on the road, whether it's photos, sketches. A big part of what I do in the studio is memory, which I think is why my paintings look the way they look. But here's the Vermilion Cliffs, an older painting, 2011. Here's a piece that was exhibited here. I think Ross told me this is 2013. I think I've got the wrong date on here. But the Vermilion Cliffs, this is a good size piece, like 50 by 50 inches. And so this was a light effect that I don't think I could have captured on the spot with the cloud shadows on the cliffs on the top here. So that was painted from a photograph, but with the knowledge of painting on the spot in the back of my mind and referring back to my memory in a lot of ways. Again, Vermilion Cliffs here. So I was earlier on, like in the mid to late 2000s, I was mostly painting landscapes of the Southwest, and I felt that I had that skill that I had learned with drawing and painting figures. So I wanted to start putting people into the paintings, and so that's where I started to incorporate some figures. And the people of the Southwest obviously made sense. Who am I going to put in the paintings? But the people whose land this is. And also at this time, I was influenced and exposed to great artists of the Southwest. Many. I can't name them all. There's so many. But Blumenschein is a great influence and an artist I really look up to. Again, setting that high bar that I can't really ever reach in my mind. I can't ever get there. And so it's this never-ending battle, never-ending path to try to get there. And so there's never an end to what we do. And I love that. I love that you can never get bored as an artist because there's always somewhere you can go. You can push further, experiment in some way. Of course, Dixon. I saw Dixon when I was in art school. I did not like his work at all. From my sort of egotistical young artist brain, I was like, they're so simple. Like what's the big deal? But after learning a little bit more about art, my eye became a little bit more sophisticated and realized what a master he was. Vinold Rice, this guy felt like a long lost brother to me, the way he saw, almost like in a Klimt-esque way, two-dimensional against three-dimensional. I was lucky enough to visit his estate in New York and got to see the archives of his work in his studio, and just blown away by his work. And then O'Keeffe, again, an artist I really didn't like early on. And in sort of the last few years, I've really taken a liking to her work. And I think she's a great example as a case study of evolution. So I thought I would stop talking about myself for a minute, because in putting this together, I became very sick of myself and looking at my paintings. So let's move to Georgia. So here's a student work from her. 1908, she's studying with William Merritt Chase at the Art Students League in New York. And so she's, again, kind of where I was, like studying realism, learning how to just get the fundamentals of drawing and painting. But you can see that she was not happy with that. This is like 1915, her piece here on the left here, that is influenced by Japanese wood blocks and imagery that she was seeing coming out of Europe, like these posters, like the Lautrec posters. So she goes to art school, learns to draw and paint fairly realistically, and then she's rebelling. She's like, who am I as an artist? How do I figure out? She wasn't satisfied with just drawing something that looked realistic. And so later she moves on to these, not too much later, in 1914 was that woodblock inspired piece. And she's studying with Arthur Wesley Dow at this point, who made really interesting graphic images. So she starts going off the deep end with these charcoal drawings. Like, talk about rebellion. She was just drawing a really realistic still life with William Merritt Chase in New York, and now she's doing these really imaginative, abstract drawings. And she's not thinking of realism, she's thinking of an emotional response at this point. And so she didn't really want to work in color until she figured out what she wanted to do. So she did a big series of these charcoal drawings, and then started to incorporate some color with these watercolors. Again, so she's still trying to figure out who she is. And it's interesting, you'll see later, she sort of comes back to where she began in a lot of ways. So 1916, so using more color, here's an oil painting that starts to kind of, maybe it's recognizable as O'Keeffe. She's looking at artists like Arthur Dove at this time, and Kandinsky. Her drawings would have been influenced by Kandinsky as well. And so you see some Dove influence here. But just, I love this. I love seeing the evolution. Her work is, I use her as an example because it's so well documented. Her catalog raisonné is amazing to see all the work she did. So she starts to think about the series. So she's working in Palo Duro Canyon, doing all these really simple drawings of the canyon. And here's an example of a study, and then a more well thought out finished oil painting. So in 1917, I feel like there's a lot of exploration happening for her. And this is a really valuable time for us artists. As I mentioned before, that's how we learn who we are. She's exposed to drawings and paintings from Europe. I think there's a lot of influence there. For me, this was my exploration time. Again, this is where I was doing what she was doing, trying to figure out who I was. And again, not that much longer. Her paintings, they start to look like what we think of as Georgia O'Keeffe paintings. These are early, 1918. It's a pretty stark difference from what was happening here to here. And that's a really interesting big jump in her work to me. And a little step back more towards abstraction. And then her getting into the idea of a series. And the reason people paint series, I guess I'll speak for myself, Georgia as well, you'll see here she talks about that. But it's like, I think of, if you're gonna cook a recipe, you get a new recipe, and you try cooking it once, it's gonna be okay. But if you perfect that recipe and if you try and cook it 15, 20, 100 times, it's gonna be a lot better and much more interesting. It's gonna change, you're gonna make it your own as time goes on. And so with a series, as an artist, you give yourself an assignment. How can I paint this thing many different ways that keeps me interested? And Georgia talks a little bit about it here. I hope the volume is on. Let's see here. There's closed captioning is not great. YouTube didn't do a good job of it, but let's see here.
Why have you done those paintings in series?
Well, I have a series of paintings of Jack and the Pulpit. With Lake George, we met a Jack and the Pulpit. My first one was almost photographic. It was about 10 by 12. And the next one got up to be 30 by 36. And the next one got 30 by 36. And the next one I think was 30 by 40. Well, that's when the jack got black. Well, then I made an abstract thing of all the different parts of the jack, and it got to be 48 inches high. And then I thought I ought to be able to simplify it more than that. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, really, the thing that makes you interested in that flower and that you wouldn't look at the flower without is the jack in the middle of it. So I painted just the jack. Now, does that make sense for you?
It makes sense to me. So here's, I love that she called them alligator pears. I'd never heard of avocados called alligator pears before, but it's interesting. I really am interested in these two paintings with the pink sort of cloth there. This is a really, I do a lot of this where I paint something and it maybe doesn't feel right, or I want to explore it deeper, and something might look very similar, but she was working through this problem. How do I improve on something, or how can I do something differently? And it's like, God, I would never paint. She did way more paintings than this of avocados, and I don't think I ever could, but these are so interesting to look at when I see these at her museum in Santa Fe. Some of these super simple still life paintings, but to me they're so interesting. Her handling of paint, and how many different ways can she paint something and keep it interesting. So here's in the early 20s. And another aspect of what Georgia did and what I do to a certain degree is, you find a subject that that resonates with you. And in her case, Lake George in New York, she painted quite a bit, spent a lot of time up there with Alfred Stieglitz, who was her husband. And again, diving deeper into getting to know something, a subject, an area. And if she went to Lake George and painted something once, great. But how interesting is it that these are all paintings done at Lake George, and they're all so different over a span of time. And so I really love that. So here's Alfred Stieglitz, her husband, and he was kind of her greatest PR person. He had a gallery in New York at the time, Gallery 291, that was exposing America to modernists. So he's a big part of modernism coming to America. And he saw her work and it really resonated with him. And he fell in love with her and her work. He didn't really want to sell it, actually. He would talk people out of buying her paintings. And so he just wanted to keep everything she did. But there's a book I read where she said something like, it'd be nice to make my living this year, because he kept turning down sales. And so eventually he would sell some, but they had a really interesting relationship. There's a book called Foursome. I couldn't tell you the author, but it's really interesting. It's a book about Alfred Stieglitz, Georgia O'Keeffe, Rebecca Strand, and Paul Strand. So here's the Stieglitz circle. These were some of the artists that he was showing, artists that O'Keeffe was influenced by. She was picking up influence everywhere. That's what we all do. You can't help but be influenced by what's around you. And these were really groundbreaking artists at the time. The way Paul Strand would crop his photography, probably influenced by Impressionism in a lot of ways, but Arthur Dove's handling of composition, these were all influences for her. Again, look at how many different ways she can paint a flower, a simple white flower, and they're all interesting and all different. And so this is, I'm not modeling myself after Georgia O'Keeffe, but this is what I've done naturally. It just felt natural to me to be working in a series, because I couldn't get it right the first time, or it didn't feel complete. Eventually maybe I'll stop painting portraits if I feel like I've completed it and mastered it. That's not going to happen, because I'm not going to get there. There's always a new way to do something, and sticking with a subject and a narrow frame of an idea is going to push creativity that much further, in my mind. So these are some earlier portraits. This piece here was at the Core Show in, I think, 2012. Maybe these are some more recent portraits, but just trying to look at a subject and how many different ways can I paint it. Some are like off the wall weird, and some are kind of more realism, like this piece here. If you saw the painting, it's pretty realistic. This painting actually was very strongly influenced by Norman Rockwell, of all people. I read a book on his process of how he puts a painting together, and I said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a study. I did a really finished drawing study, and then I did a drawing on canvas, really like a completely finished charcoal drawing, and I started to get precious about it, and I couldn't touch this drawing. I didn't want to paint on top of it because I put so much effort into it. So the painting sat there for about a year, and then I finally had a show coming up that I wanted to put the painting in, so I ended up painting on top of it, first in just a brown wash, like a black or a brown sepia toned wash, and then thicker oil paint on top of that. But then like this is a kind of newer, I don't know, from maybe 6 months ago, but it's a weirdo piece. It's an experimental little piece of clouds that they look like a kid drew, how a kid might draw a cloud. But I love the idea of that. Like, can I make that work? Can I hint at nature in a very, very simplified way, and yet have some element of realism? And this figure, when you see the painting in person, it feels very realistic against that flat, simple background. So these are ideas that I'm constantly playing with. And so I started, as I was painting landscapes, I was painting figures, portraits. I wanted to dive deeper into the Southwest, and what was I seeing when I was visiting Santa Fe and Taos? I was seeing hollyhocks, and so I wanted to paint these, and it's such a heavy. There's a heavy shadow cast by great artists like George O'Keeffe, even Ed Mell, who painted flowers in an up close manner. But I've always kind of felt like from my earliest times of when I approached the Southwest, it's all been done. And at the time, my mind said, it's all been done. How can I approach this subject? And I came back to the realization that I hadn't done it yet. So how can I see the Southwest in my own way? And how can I approach a subject in my own way? So that's always my goal. There's influence, but I really try to make something my own in a way and create my own world. And that's what I love about artists like O'Keeffe or Ed Mell or any of the greats. You see their paintings as their own little worlds that they've created. It's a language that they're putting out for us to look at and take in. So that's always been my goal. And I thought that I wanted to paint these. I was painting these portraits, and so I thought I want to give the flowers the same importance. So I want to paint portraits of flowers. So I wanted them to be the key feature and really zero in on them. And so this has been a really gratifying and satisfying subject for me. These are actually this is my first, you can't really see, I'm standing in front of it. This piece on the left is my first sort of stepping into painting these flowers. And then these are more recent ones. I want to say this is probably one of my more recent pieces that I had a show in Santa Fe that it was part of. And the one on the right-hand side as well, it's called Farmer's Market with Poppy. So I went with my daughter Poppy to the farmer's market to get these flowers because I had an idea for a painting. I actually made that pot. I got really into ceramics in 2018, and so I made that pot, and I had this idea to do a painting with that pot, and so this has been again a big part of a series that I continue to work in. It's figures in the landscape. So it's okay. Figures in the landscape. And I'm sort of, if you go back to my early days as a fresh out of art school, I was painting figures out on the beach and that sunlight bouncing off of them. And this is my same thinking. I'm thinking of how light affects the figure, how light affects the landscape, and going back to art school, composition. How does the placement of these figures and the clouds and the sagebrush, every element, the way a shadow is cast on the cliffs, I'm thinking of how that affects the composition, how it leads the viewer's eye around the painting. So these are all, it's a design problem for me when I'm putting a painting together. The placement of a sagebrush is not random. I'm placing it for a compositional reason. And again, these things, you're not going to be able to see it here, but these ideas start in sketchbooks like this, these little simple things, and then they turn into these sometimes very large pieces. Here's some of the earlier multi-figure pieces. These are probably around 2010, 11, maybe. Some later. Again, it's like how many times can I paint something in a different way? And they may seem repetitive in some ways, but for me, I'm finding something different in each piece. It might be the color key, the color harmony. It might be the way I'm designing shapes. It might be a compositional problem, or sometimes it's a technical thing. Sometimes I really want to paint something realistically, and I'll do a painting just because of that. Sort of like that flower piece that was influenced by Norman Rockwell. So here's some landscapes, and this is kind of I feel for me, this is like my Lake George equivalent for George O'Keeffe. I've actually bought a house out in the middle of nowhere here at the Vermilion Cliffs because I love this area so much. And I haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much to do there. But these are a few looks at this area that I really love. And then taking what I've done and trying to think about combining them. And I had this idea about how can I screen the figures with these hollyhocks that grow so tall out in the Southwest. And so I started playing with these ideas of multi-figure pieces with the hollyhocks incorporated in a way where it's your attention goes to as humans, we want to look at it. When you see a human element in a painting, that's where your eye's going to go. But I really liked the pattern that the flowers create, and just the technical. It's really technically difficult for me to put these together, so I liked that challenge. So just pushing myself. How can I grow? How can I keep evolving? And some of these changes and these tweaks might seem small, but when you look at a career and an artist's work over a lifetime like O'Keeffe, you can really see the changes along the way. A subject that's been painted a million times, again, trying to figure out how I can make it my own. And so I was approaching these cowboys as like these rodeo superheroes, and referring back to my comic book days and animation. These sort of feel like these. It's one of the big images when people think of America. It's the American cowboy. So I loved the heroic feel of these rodeo guys flying through space, like very unrealistically. Specifically this one down here, just kind of flying up in the clouds. And here's the last three that I painted. Two of them are here in the show. These are the more recent ones, and this one in the middle was really a lot of fun. It was a crazy challenge for me to paint. I often don't paint structural images, elements in my images beyond maybe like a pueblo or that type of building, but something that had to, a lot of straight lines and things like that. And then of course the lettering of the Coors logo was a big challenge for me, and trying to figure out how I could make that come together. So it was a bear, but I really enjoyed the painting. About a year ago, I got into lettering, like sign painting lettering. Just for fun, I started practicing that, so it was interesting to be able to use a little bit of that skill with this piece. And then again, like where I've painted these things, what else can I do with it? So this is a sculpture I created a few years back, based on one of my paintings actually. And so this is it's basically like a flat piece of aluminum that's painted on both sides, and the black is like an embossed, or I guess that'd be debossed. The line drawing is in black, and then inside from there is the painted metal. And this is just experimenting for me. It's really a lot of fun to see how many different ways can I see this subject, and it's kind of bizarre and off the wall, but I like that. So as I'm diving into the Southwest, I'm thinking of these icons of the West. Like, what do I think of when I look at the Southwest? And so each of these elements are series for me. Whether it's the cowboy, a cow skull. My dad found that skull just outside of my house in Marble Canyon at the Vermilion Cliffs. We were on a little hike, and it's always my dream to find a skull like that out in the desert. It's like a far-fetched dream, but we're walking down this creek bed, and my dad looks in the bushes. He goes, "That looks like a animal bones or something." And I was like, I assumed it was a plastic bag from a grocery store or something stuck in the sand. And I go, "No, it's just a plastic bag." And he reaches in and pulls out this amazingly preserved cow skull. So I've done a number of paintings of it. But again, that connection, sense of place, that's Vermilion Cliffs as well. You don't see the cliffs in this painting, but to me it says so much about the region, and there's like that story behind it. There's a really personal connection to that. And like Ross mentioned, I've been lucky enough to work with some icons of the West. You know, I did this blanket project with Pendleton based on this painting, which again is a step. How many different ways can I look at the West? So to me, this is a still life of a hat. This is a landscape. This is a portrait. It's a portrait of a hat. Here's a project I did with Stetson. There's this great image by Lon McGargy. You can see on the right-hand side there, The Last Drop from his Stetson is the title of the painting. And it's a cowboy feeding his horse some water. It's the last drop of water that he's feeding to his horse. And they used that on the lining of their hats, on the inside of their hats. And they reached out and asked me to do a recreation of, my version of The Last Drop. And so this was a really cool project. I was involved. There were a few other artists that did this. Thomas Blackshear, and I don't recall the third artist's name, but it was part of a limited edition hat. It was 100 years anniversary of that Lon McGargy painting, so they released 100 of these hats. And they came along with little prints that came with the hats of each painting. So I'm going to jump back to O'Keeffe for a second, just looking at her series and how far she's pushing herself. A subject that I don't think I'd ever be interested in, she made very interesting, just like the avocados. So she's exposed to artists like Charles Sheeler. There's a strong influence there, but they feel different. When I see one of Charles Sheeler's paintings, they feel like his paintings, and her paintings of New York feel like hers. But there's influence there for sure. And then when I think of Georgia O'Keeffe, I think of New Mexico, and I feel like she really hit her stride here. Again, sense of place. This is one region. How many different ways can she paint it and express her feelings about this area? And again, how many different ways can one subject be painted? This is her house in Abiquiu. And a more realistic take on what it looked like, and then on the right-hand side, a very abstract idea of the house. And the painting on the right-hand side, love it or hate it, could only be achieved by making multiple paintings of this house. She would most likely not get there. I mean, this painting too, I love this painting here with the clouds. You may not be able to see where I'm standing, but it's just really, really interesting work to me. And sometimes, with an artist, it's not like they can do no wrong. I don't love every painting that these great artists did, but I love seeing their evolution. And it makes me feel better that I doubt myself often. And when you see changes like this in experimentation, it's artists pushing themselves and saying, like, was that last one I did any good? Maybe I should try something different, and just push. And you don't necessarily have to go this far, but change is, I feel, very important. So here's a look at some of her evolution and the wide variety of what she was doing. This is just a glimpse. There's a lot more. She's did a lot of paintings, and there's a lot to show, but and here's just a quick look at her later works. You see the one on the right-hand side. She started to lose her sight towards the end of her life, and had to use assistants to help her actually do paintings. And but it's really interesting to see her kind of circle back to her very purely abstract ideas. And then she ended with ceramics in the last phase of her life. And this is sort of a joke. What would Georgia do? I think about this with all the artists of the past that I really look up to. What would they do? Would they do the same painting over and over and not push themselves? Would they, how would they approach things? How many followers on Instagram would Georgia have? The correct answer is 0, because she wouldn't be on Instagram because she's too cool. But I want to take a minute to talk about Instagram and social media, actually. A lot of people bring up AI. That's like the conversation with artists these days. And I don't feel threatened by AI. Maybe I'm naive. Instagram, social media, feels like a bigger problem to me for the art world than AI. And when I say the art world, like the fine art world, when artists making paintings, I took some notes here that I'm going to read a little bit of because I want to get this right. I feel like this is a very important topic. We're living in a time where visibility is mistaken for vision. Speed is mistaken for depth. I've been influenced by many sources, as I've talked about, and shown a few of them here. Historic artists, contemporary artists, painters, weavers, sculptors, writers, musicians. I think of Woody Guthrie or Cisco Houston can set me off and influence me and get me excited about art as much as Maynard Dixon or Georgia O'Keeffe. So I really feel like influence is a good thing. It's inevitable. We're going to be influenced by other artists. Dan McCaw, who is an artist I referred to earlier, had this great analogy. He'd say, when you ski down a slope, it's impossible to not cross other skiers' paths. But it's important to not go down their exact same path. So I'm always thinking of that. We're all skiing down this slope together as artists, but we want to really find our own path. And I think what feels different now, especially in the age of social media, is how quickly ideas and images circulate without context or lineage. An image can be copied and reposted and reinterpreted and monetized very often before the original artist who thought up the idea has even fully completed that thought of the idea and fully explored the idea. It's something I've noticed as my work has become more visible. I've experienced something that many artists can relate to, which is seeing deeply personal ideas, a visual language, and hard-won solutions echoed back, often without acknowledgement, sometimes without even realizing where the ideas originally came from. And what concerns me about this is it's not about my work. I'll continue to evolve, and I'm already 10 steps ahead of the paintings that are hanging here in this show, so it's not about that. Really what concerns me is what gets lost when artists skip this uncomfortable work, the awkward phase of being an artist, and not finding their own voice. When you borrow someone else's language too early, what you're doing as an artist is you're robbing yourself of the chance to discover what you can only say. And this is super important. It's as I've been mentioning, I've always been wanting to find myself as an artist, so I'm always thinking about that. I really feel like it's our responsibility as artists, as collectors, as curators and galleries, to treat originality not as a style, but as a practice. Originality is not about being loud, it's not about being new, it's about being honest, patient, and willing to sit in the uncertainty long enough for something authentic to emerge. So my hope is that newer artists that might be hearing this are emerging, who are emerging, would take my advice, which is to slow down, fail privately. I'm so lucky to have come up in a time when everything that I painted was not expected to be posted on Instagram. I did so many bad paintings, many of which were sold that'll probably recirculate at some time, but I was able to grow kind of without anybody watching me. I was being ignored. I wasn't a super successful artist. For a good 10 years, I was just struggling, check to check, barely making a living, but I was okay with it. I was still making a living, and it was never about money for me. So I was able to have that time to develop. Nobody was watching me, and I love that. So I feel for artists these days that feel like they need to be famous and maybe come on the scene 5 years ago and already feel like they need to sell 1,000 prints of their image, because that's what is happening these days, and it's just not about that. Like, to slow down. Another thing is to just let your influences digest fully. My influences were being shown in galleries. I wish they hadn't been, but when I say influences, I'm still influenced by artists, but very strongly influenced images were being shown. And I don't think that we need more images, we need more authentic voices. And to make this happen, it takes time. So that's my bit on social media. Another artist that has 0 followers on Instagram is George Carlson, because he's too cool to be on Instagram. But I look at the evolution of his work, and he's just a really great role model to see what he's done. I mean, he's basically mastered every medium, every subject that he's worked in, and he's not scared to step away from that greatness and try something new or change. You know, he was really well known for these images of the Tarahumara Indians down in Mexico, and on and on, his sculpture. And then he started changing and doing, instead of doing the native figures, he started doing horses and ballerinas, and then later here in his life, coming back to the landscape, which he was doing earlier on in the 70s. You think, I thought of George Carlson as this master sculptor. How could he stop sculpting, you know? And then he picks up his paintbrush again, and then he's doing these insane paintings that you can't figure out either. Like, how could he do this? And he's got a real curiosity, pointing back to curiosity. When you look in his eyes, it's like he's like a 6-year-old little kid, the way his eyes sparkle. And he's always seen the world in a really artistic way. This is a pretty gruesome painting, but an artist like George is the type of artist that would see this and felt that it needed to be painted. About this painting, George says, "On the one hand, I was fascinated by the beauty of the coyote's coat, but distressed by the irreverent, brutal display. The longer I stood there, the more I was convinced that it should be painted. My mind was fully engaged. All I was thinking about was how to capture and communicate this experience. As an artist, it's all about learning how to see and to trust your feelings, to take in your surroundings in a mindful way." So that's advice from a master. I did not ask George for that quote. I pulled that from an article. However, my friend Glenn Dean here, we're good enough friends that I could say 2 days before I fly out here, could you give me a quick quote on influence and how influence works with you? And so Glenn says, "From my earliest days of painting, my art influences have boldly shown me what's possible, what to strive for aesthetically, and they have given me the highest standard of quality to guide me as I learn and grow. The clarity of vision and unique voice in their works is an inspiration to see and is something I strive for in my own work. I've always felt a strong pull of vision toward being able to translate painting subjects with a certain sense of bold harmony with a simplified sense of realism. I've worked hard and continue to work hard for this personal view to reach the canvas effectively." So I think the key points there are looking at artists from the past that we look up to guide us. These artists are our guides. They've helped us along the way. Glenn didn't really go to a whole lot of art school. He took a few workshops with artists, like week-long workshops, but he really was guided and learned from artists from the past, historic artists. And the fact that he's saying, I have worked hard and I continue to work hard. He doesn't feel like he's reached anything yet. He's just scratching the surface. Another one of my good friends, Josh Elliott, who I asked a quote from a couple days ago, has some great points here as well. "Young artists often ask how they can find their style. By that, I'm guessing they want to have their own voice. We are all influenced by artists that came before us. My trick is to have many influences, not just 1 or 2 artists, and not even just painters. I've been inspired by a rug I saw at Target. By taking bits of inspiration from several artists and sources, it becomes your own, reflecting your tastes and sensibilities. If an artist is only inspired by 1 or 2 artists, they will not find their own voice. They rob themselves of the joy of seeing someone respond to their unique vision, which is one of the most rewarding aspects of being an artist." So these are 2 artists I really greatly respect. I'm lucky enough to call friends, people I text with almost daily, and we have group phone calls. We've done group exhibits together. I learn a lot from them and feel really lucky to have them. Just a couple quick looks at some real quick early works and later works. Here's Chuck Close. He was successful with these paintings early on, but moved. He wasn't satisfied. These hyper-realism versus where he ended up. These are some of his last paintings here from an exhibit. Dunton, who is one of my favorites. Same subject, huge evolution from his early days as an illustrator to a later work. And I just learned so much from these people, and I love to see where they've gone. Again, Dixon, early work and a later work. Here's a quick glimpse at some of my early stuff. And I'm like Glenn said, I'm continuing to work hard. I'm not satisfied at where I'm at. I want to keep growing. I want to keep experimenting and pushing things. These are some more recent paintings from the last 6 months. This is believe it or not, this is the Vermilion Cliffs, these Black Hills. We took a hike about 5 hours up a trail and discovered this crazy area. So here's a look back. I was in the Core Show. I'm going to wrap things up here soon. Core Show in 2012. It was a big deal for me. And a key point here is that none of these paintings sold in the show. And that was a great example of, I think I was in the show the previous year and did really well, whatever that means. I sold paintings, but this was a great lesson that it means absolutely nothing. Sales happen or they don't happen. It's not why I make paintings. It's not why I choose to paint what I paint. Paintings sell or they don't sell, and an artist's success should not be judged on how many paintings they sell, but how true they are to their original voice, and how interesting they are as artists. Sales are silly. Like, to me, I feel like this middle piece was a real breakthrough piece for me. I don't think it's like an amazing painting, but it was a breakthrough piece for me. And all these paintings have since sold, and I wish I kept that painting. So there was a breakthrough moment for me. And some guy offered to buy it. I said, I don't want to sell it. And he said, well, how about if I paid you twice as much for it? And I said, okay, I'll sell it. But that money's long gone. I should have kept the painting. That was another lesson. So here's my studio these days. Here's where I work. I built this studio on my property in Ojai during COVID. This was kind of always my dream space. It's just a big open warehouse. I don't know if you can see it here, but The Simpsons are still part of my daily life. I've got all this stuff in my studio. This is clean, very clean for me. But I love having the studio. My kids' play set is right over here. So I can hear them screaming and having fun out there, look out the window and see them, which is fun. And they come and join me in the studio and paint every now and then. Here's my palette that I work on every day. And there's a postcard of George O'Keeffe there to remind me to push things, not be a wimp. And here's one of the largest pieces I've done. It's called The Song at Sunset. And then here's what's on the easel right now. This is I don't know, 80 something, I think it's 6.5 feet tall or something, but the Vermilion Cliffs. And I get the question often, like with when I'm being interviewed, what's next? That's the question. What do you have planned next, or where do you see your work in 5 years, in 10 years? And I just don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I have no idea where my work's going to go. One painting leads to the next. I have no idea where I'm going to be. The next painting, I have no idea what it's going to be. My hope is that I'll continue to challenge myself and grow as an artist, and keep following what interests me, and be true to that. The thing that pushes me is what I find interesting. If a painting feels like I'm working, I'm probably not doing the right painting. If it feels like it's not always fun, it's a struggle often, but if it's satisfying, then I know I'm on the right path. I want to push myself for the greatness that all of these artists that I mentioned have achieved, and it's a challenge that I'll never reach. I'll never get there, and I love that. But that idea and that concept and that drive is what keeps me going. Thank you.